So when I heard the title of this book through one of my colleagues, Doug Hess, who does Forgotten Hollywood, our number one show here on JLJ Media, I said, I want to read it too. And I want to talk to him also. It's called Driving Maryland, Life and Times of Legendary Hollywood Agent Norman Brokaw, but it's more than just what that title suggests. It is name droppy, page turny, revelatory stuff that you had no idea when it comes to how Hollywood works. Plus, it's the story of a guy who went from literally the mail room, like literally one of the lower jobs you can get, to running the place, CEO and president. I mean, just it's a great story, and his son wrote it. So I get to have him on the show. It's Joel Brokaw. Hi, Joel.
Hi, hello, James. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. I had you back on my channel. It's like I got back on the channel. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you
Congratulations.
very much. Thank you.
Doing books is not an easy thing. And what made you? What was the impetus for you deciding to write about your father?
Well, I just felt like his was a story that deserved to be told. He had done so much good in the world and was such a difference maker. And I felt like, number one, that his story is inspirational for anyone because he made something out of nothing. And what does it take to do that? So I feel like there's takeaway from the book from that standpoint. But also, I think that Hollywood is such an influential media worldwide, and I experience. So that was one of the primary motivations for me.
Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go. We're just gonna dig right in because I just want to dig. Ask the question. So in the book, your father was a loyalist. It looked like when he had a client, he was very loyal to them. He tells several stories. One of them is with Donna Summer, one of my favorites.
Yes.
Who I got to meet
Yes.
myself. Actually, got to meet myself. Great person. But how she was having some concerns about a single. The song "Dim All the Lights." How he got on a plane and like. So your father, it looks like through this book, when he was connected to somebody, he was connected. Is that correct?
Absolutely. He had a real family feeling that was really part of his agency at the time, but also the way that he regarded his clients. George Slaughter, the man who brought America Laughing in the late
Yep.
1960s, he described my father as being an agent, a manager, a lawyer, an accountant, and a psychiatrist. And so my father really was there to be of help. And that was his drug. His drug was helping people. And so he didn't do it gratuitously. He didn't do it for like giving to get, like he was going to get some reward out of it. It was really coming from a generosity of his heart. And so that was something I think that pervaded every single relationship that he had. He wanted to foster relationships that would last a lifetime. And that's the reason why so many of his clients were with him for decades. So I think that that he just stepped up and even with the story that you're talking about, which was an extremely small gesture on his part, it was one of those things that made a critical difference in her life. And I think that he had a genius as well, that he could get to the truth of something in the smallest possible gesture. Part of his genius, I think.
Yeah. Well, also, there's a story about Tony Orlando. And I remember that episode of him walking on the time. I remember that whole thing. I remember watching it. Yes, folks, I am old enough. I may look young, but I'm old enough to remember all that. And it's funny how he was instrumental in helping him when he was going through. And this is very well documented. Tony Lawrence talked about the times he had with drugs and stuff, and the deaths of his closest wife and his close friend. But like again, I mean, we're talking someone. It seems like a simple gesture, but it feels like he really was. He cared about these people.
Yeah, I mean, Barry Gordy, who was a lifelong client of my father's, when Barry Gordy moved out to Hollywood and wanted to broaden the platform for Motown Records, he said about my father that he knew about what his clients wanted before they did. And when Barry Gordy heard my father talking about this, he thought he was full of it until he started to do it for him himself. And so I think that, part of that is just, I don't know, it's just intuitive, or maybe it's just an energy, reading an energy that can't really be explained. But he had that ability to really come up with that little action that somebody could do on behalf of themselves. And the story with Tony Orlando is that he had been in a lockdown mental hospital, and also had a cocaine problem at the same time in response to the death of his sister and his best friend. And this was after he had the television show and all the hit singles and all of that. And his career was basically kind of going down the tubes. And so my father how to walk on a tightrope. And again, it's like you could say it's somebody about walking the tightrope. It has a metaphorical meaning.
Yes.
But my father's logic was, if you can show people that you can do that, any suspicion that they might have that you are still having problems will be eliminated completely. So, and Tony got that, and he saw that again as one of these moments that completely changed his life and put him on the straight and narrow. And it's something that when you talk to him today, he says still has incredible gratitude towards my father about it. But that's what he was doing across the board. And that's why people had trusted him and had loyalty. And again, I feel like one of the takeaways I hope people will get from this book, in addition to some great stories about people who they really know very well, is that it's not about, he was not a person that said, what's in it for me? It was more about, what can you and I, James, do together to lift all of us up? And what can we create together? And that was just something that doesn't grow on trees, even back in that day, and certainly find that. So I was hoping that somebody might take that to heart, and even if they're putting on new tires on cars, that they'll have that same spirit about them, because I think that's how you really create long-lasting relationships and find purpose.
I related to it because I always say we all win when we all win.
Correct.
I always say that. I learned that from a friend of mine. I didn't think that up myself, folks. Someone else, a friend of mine, thought that up. I just use it. I just love that, because everybody around you, if you're all working together and supporting each other, it's better. It's just, and your dad, obviously, that's how it was. I kept seeing it over and over and over again in your stories.
Yeah, and I think, we're this kind of like what's in it for me society, and so everybody is like always thinking about, well, how do I advance myself? How can I make more money? How can I get more things? How can I, have all of these luxury items and so forth? And my father really ended up achieving everything he wanted in his life, but it wasn't about grasping onto his own self-fulfillment. It was really about just having the joy of helping other people. And as I said, that's what is the common thread through most of the stories,
Mm-hmm.
is the fun that he was having in his work. And
Yeah.
that's a rare commodity these days too.
Yes, it is. I agree with that completely. Everybody's jaded and just kind of like, yeah, I've seen it all, I've heard it all, and,
Yeah.
whatever. It's like he sounds like he was excitable, that he was excited about what he did.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I say about him that he spoke in superlatives with exclamation marks. And it could be a little bit, like give me a break kind of thing. Like when I was a little kid, I just didn't understand that energy, because
Oh,
people would come into his office, and he had all these frames with pictures of all of his clients and letters from important people. And it was like this ultimate dog and pony show that he would do. But the bottom line is like, if you're an important person, you want to be represented by somebody who is also important. And so he kind of got that, but it was kind of like I kind of always wrinkled my nose a little bit at it before I really totally understand what his game was.
But now as you get it, you kind of go, oh, okay. What makes him over a
Yeah.
little bit to you then? You're
Well, there
like,
were a lot of things. Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of things, James, that I didn't understand about him because I was a little kid.
yeah,
I had a very sort of narrow perch on his life because he was very close to the cuff. He did not talk about his work. He certainly did not talk very much about his clients, and he never spoke about anything negative about his clients as well. I mean, you would have to probably give him some truth serum, some sodium pentothal or something like that to get him to say anything bad about anyone.
yeah.
And it was basically, it was very smart too, because people love gossip. And if he said something like, oh, that person isn't a very nice person, or he messed me up or something like that, then people would play the telephone game on that and it would get back to him. And all that trust that he had developed through all the years would diminish. His integrity would be lost.
Well, you talk about you, and so folks, he does include Mr. Bill Cosby in there.
That's right.
But lifelong friends. But your dad was already gone, kind of gone by then before anything came out, right? I mean, it was.
Yes, I mean, my father played an instrumental role in his career. He got him onto I Spy, and they had really one of the most glorious agent client relationships in the history of Hollywood.
Right.
And but what was sort of upsetting for me was when my father passed away 8 years ago, there were all these obituaries in London Times and New York Times, Washington Post, you name it, for somebody that hardly anybody heard of. He commanded that kind of respect, but there was always that cloud around him. Well, was he part of the cover up of the Bill Cosby situation? And so I felt like I had to really lay it out in terms of what their relationship was like and what the ground rules were. And basically, the bottom line is that my father did not get involved in people's personal lives unless he was invited. And the Cosbys, for very good reasons, Bill kept that life very private because, with the history of race, except African American male, he was on Nixon's enemies list.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
And so the less that people knew about that, the more protected they would be because of the nature of institutional racism.
Yeah.
And so that was well understood. However, I think in addition, if there were a morality clause for all of his clients, he would not have any clients. So,
Right.
so nobody sort of, no one was an angel.
Yes. I always say that.
He was dealing with human beings who were incredibly talented, but they were also human beings. And so that was part of what I think made the business so interesting to him, was that it was never routine. But getting back to the main story, by the time that, probably halfway into their relationship, very, very little to do with Mr. Cosby's day-to-day life. That would be assigned to someone else. And so my father was basically there to kind of do the big deals. And there was so much respect that they had for each other that, it was almost like there was a kid gloves kind of relationship. And so my father, really did not know the gravity of the accusations. And I feel like, I work with the Cosby family as well in the PR department. And people ask me, well, how do you feel about what happened? And I just say it was a tragedy that rivals the Greek tragedies. It was just an extraordinary sadness for all involved, because you look at what Bill Cosby and Camille Cosby have done for civil rights, for education, for social justice, all of these things in the world. They did tremendous work, and it all was obliterated by the cancel culture. And keeping in mind again that what he is accused of is not forgivable.
Right. Right.
So that's what we're dealing with. That's the real world.
Right. Right. Yeah. I know,
But
but
anyway, I go through it, and as I said, in some
yeah.
detail to say, here's how it was structured. And by the time these accusations came out, my father had pretty severe dementia, and I don't even think he even could understand the magnitude of what was going on. So he was spared having to deal with that.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up. I thought it was kind of a
Mhm.
sad thing. Like, wow, they had this relationship for since 1964, and by the
Right.
time this came out, the way he was, I feel like he was spared too. That at least he goes away thinking everything was, it's fine. But also that you did iron out that not all agents know everything about their clients. Anyway, there's all kinds of staff that are, like you said, are assigned to things. So that's why I brought that up, because you ironed that out, kind of
Thanks. I appreciate that, James.
what his job was, and and I. That's the thing about and folks, we're talking William Morris Agency. We have to, you all know the names, folks. You know the name, you know the name, you know the name. And like I said again, he started in the mail room and worked his way up.
Yeah,
When you,
I think I just want to add one other thing. I
please,
think that my father got involved with clients' personal lives. Um, if there was something alarming that was happening that he felt was going to sabotage their career, then he would bring it up, but very, very carefully.
yeah,
And only if he felt that there was a willingness on their part to listen. So, but other than that, it was, it was kept very professional, as friendly and as much fun as he had. There was a sort of a strict professional code of ethics that he was brought up in the business.
but see, the thing is, you're dealing with artists. So when you deal with artists, whether it's singers, songwriters, actors, musicians, a lot of stuff goes, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There's a lot of stuff that went on back in the day and still goes on today, I'm sure. But I mean, there's a lot of things that happen that these artists are still very talented. Like you said, if we canceled everybody because of what they done did, I mean, half people beat their women. They don't. We know they drink too much. We know all the stuff that they did. But
Yeah.
there's a lot of art and talent that did happen, and this is Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood. I mean, in the term of in quotes, it's entertainment.
Yeah. I mean, you look at some of the people my father worked with, and a lot of them had tragic ends. You mentioned
Oh yeah,
Marilyn Monroe and Elvis and
Natalie
Natalie
Wood.
Wood.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I think my father, had a very realistic uh, view of human nature. And I think many of the clients too had a realistic view that, look, how many people in the Screen Actors Guild actually become they are able to make a living at their craft. And so the time in which you have popularity and you have a good gig and you have that fame and fortune might be very limited. And so his whole idea was, let's make the most of your opportunity and let's try to create longevity that we all want and happiness and so forth. But as I said, people when they get a bit of fame and fortune, whatever is not screwed down tight is going to fly off, and that's just a fact of life. And my father was there when people got sick. That was one of the things that people so many times have brought up to me when they meet me. Oh, your father helped me when I had a problem, or my mother got sick, or something like that. So he was there to help people, but he also was very realistic that we're dealing with human beings.
Yeah, and there's a whole story about the Colonel, folks. You know who that is. And there is a chapter about him driving Maryland auditions. So driving Maryland, there's a chapter in there. So you guys know that for sure. But I want to switch gears for a second because for you, what is one takeaway that surprised you while doing your research on your that you didn't know about your father?
Well, there's a lot because, as I said, uh, in writing the book, I had an opportunity to interview my dad, um, and he told me some great stories. But he was a very reluctant storyteller, and as I mentioned before, his dementia started to kick into high gear, and we realized that it was not going to be a fruitful exercise. So there's a part of the book that's pretty solid and has a great amount of detail. And then the rest of the book is kind of forensic, in which I had to try to reconstruct things and find people who were still alive, who were witness to these particular periods. So it was very challenging. So I guess, like one thing I found out that was surprising to all of my siblings and I was that if any offer came into the William Morris Agency for Elvis, that it had to go through my dad. I had no idea about that. And that was, I mean, considering that he was the hottest act in the 1950s and 60s, that made my father probably the envy of everyone else in the office, that he had that kind of relationship with Colonel Parker, that Colonel Parker trusted him so much to be the arbiter of all of that. And then the other thing was a bigger picture situation, which was I had an attitude about my dad that I felt like he was deficient socially,
Oh,
that he had no friends outside of show business. He had no interests outside of his work. Like I like to scuba dive, I like to garden, I like to cook. I if 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 my career as a writer or whatever I'm doing disappears tomorrow, I will be a happy person. My dad didn't have that. And I felt like he was just a workaholic. And then when I started talking to people, they all said, "Oh, we used to go out with your dad and have dinner with him. He was so much fun." And then I realized that he didn't need to go anywhere else. He had everything all in like one-stop shopping. Like Marilyn McCoo and Billy Davis Jr. of the Fifth Dimension talk about this, that going out to dinner with him, and they said we never had to talk about business. We just had so much fun together. And so so that was a side of him that I didn't see ever, because as a dad, he was a different kettle of fish, so to speak. He was very strict, very controlling, a little emotionally unavailable. And I explained that talking about his childhood and kind of a childhood where there were a lot of tragedies growing up. And so his way of dealing with it was to kind of pull back a little bit on the emotional energy. So anyway, he was a quite different person that way. But I realized that, going back to the story, that he had everything he wanted in life through his work. And the unfortunate thing is, when he got dementia and his work started to wind down, he he didn't have that much to do. And that was sort of sad to watch that.
and yet there's a picture of a Christmas party, and I'm like sitting there going, okay, we got Candy Spelling. Yes, that Candy Spelling.
Right.
I'm actually friends with Randy,
Okay.
her son. Danny Thomas, we know who that is, of course, and little Joel Brokaw admiring a camel.
Right.
Next party picture, folks.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you, that's not a normal life, obviously.
No, no,
Uh,
it was not a normal life. I can guarantee you that.
like that, I didn't have a camel growing up at a Christmas party, so I don't know what that's all about.
Well, that Christmas party was the absolute highlight of my childhood growing up. I would look forward to that because, keep in mind, in the 1950s, kids were seen and not heard, basically.
Yes, right, all right.
You got patted on the head and told to go away, basically. But it's no accident that Danny Thomas started St. Jude, because when you were a kid and you were around him, you couldn't ask for a more loving,
Yeah.
generous person. He was so much fun. So he included
We had a
Sorry
good
to
run
be
there. We had a
physical.
good long run there. Okay. Go
Yeah,
ahead. Start with Dane Thomas again about the St. Jude. So start there.
yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. So it's no accident that Danny Thomas started St. Jude because I had a firsthand experience of getting to know him as a child. And in comparison, in contrast to the way kids were generally treated by adults in the 1950s, you felt like you were on top of the world being around him. He was so generous in spirit and so much fun and really made you feel like you were someone important being around him. And so we loved that about him and made his Christmas party the highlight of the year. I just love going there and because you never knew what was going to happen. And Camel showing up was
Yes.
a good example of that. So yeah, so that was, as I said, my childhood had a lot of really bizarre things because of that being in the epicenter of that world.
Yes.
But there were a lot of great times too.
Any of your siblings read this book?
Yes, absolutely. I sent them chapters as I was writing because I wanted to get their input and
Right.
make sure that the pitch was correct. But so they were able to sort of say, "Oh yeah, I want to add something to it." And so I'm real glad that and for us as a family too, it's been a wonderful bonding exercise for us because we all loved him so much, and the idea of being able to tell his story to people like you and so many people who've never heard of him have contacted me and saying, "Wow, I really enjoyed spending time with him,"
That's
and
why
that was very gratifying to me.
that's why I love these kind of books because I know because I work in a business. You know because I work in entertainment, I work in a business. We know there are a lot of people behind the scenes who, affect things that you see in front of the scene, in front of the scenes. And it's just like there's a whole machine going. But there's like you said, it's also humans who are part of
Yeah,
this. And
absolutely.
I hope it doesn't change. I mean, I know we're going to AI and all this stuff. I hope that the human element is still always needed in terms of this stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, that was one of the fun things in writing this book is that there's so many things that have become part of our daily lives, especially if we grew up with television, that these television series that we loved, they become part of our vernacular. But I mean, there's one story in the book that I love, and basically the gist of it is that so many of these big hit television shows of the late 1950s and early 1960s would not have happened were it not for a chimpanzee. And so there was a chimp visiting my dad's office and visiting my father's boss. And it was an old vaudeville friend who had this performing chimpanzee, and it went berserk and ran out the front door of the office and up a light post. And my father ran out to see what the commotion was. And there was this character actor who was there as well. And he looked up, and his name was Sheldon Leonard, and he played in It's a Wonderful Life and To Have and Have Not.
Yeah.
But played a lot of gangster, had a real thick New York accent. And he turned to my father and said, "I didn't know the Morris office had so many different kinds of clients." And my father said, "I think he would be perfect to work with Danny Thomas to develop because he has a sense of comedy." And nobody would have put Sheldon Leonard in that category. And then, so he got Sheldon Leonard uh, a tryout with Danny Thomas, and that became the most prolific production company of the era.
Mhm.
And between the Dick Van Dyke Show and Danny Thomas Show and Gomer Pyle and Real McCoys and all of these shows that were really part of our childhood in the 1960s, they wouldn't have happened were it not for my dad's crazy idea, and the fact that that people trusted my father's intuition and said, "Okay, let's give him a chance." And so, as I said, there's a lot of quirky stuff behind things that are important to us in our culture.
Yeah, very true, very true. Well, this book is great, folks. I want people to. That's why I wanted to talk to you a second. I wanted you to come on my show a second time. You did Forgotten Hollywood. Now you did this show. This book is really more than just the title. It's called Driving Maryland. I got to do this. I got to do this somehow. How do I do this? I'll put it in the on the show later. But it's there we go. Driving Maryland, and it's really a lot more than that. I mean, there's so many good stories, and it just really tells you gives you a glimpse of that time period and how it was ran by one guy. And also, on a side note, I think your dad also did he co-found the Betty White Cancer Center also, and he was
Yeah, Betty Ford.
Betty
Yeah,
Ford. I said Betty White.
yeah,
Betty Ford. And it was part of Cedar Sinai and all that stuff too, and on the boards
yeah,
and things like that too. So he had
yeah,
philanthropy also.
yeah. I mean, as I said, he loved helping people,
Yeah.
um, and that's that's what I hope will come forward. That if you have a generosity and spirit about your work and you invest in your relationships, good things will happen.
Yes. And maybe one day you'll have a book written about you. Who knows? And your legacy for doing this. So
So you're very kind. Thank
yeah.
you so much, James.
It was my pleasure. So Joe Brokaw is the guy. And can we follow you anywhere? Are you anywhere that people can follow?
Um, I have a website. I have a website, joelbrokaw.com, but I'm not a Twitter person. So
No Instagram, no Twitter, none of that stuff. That's
I'm digitally long in the tooth.
well, you're probably smarter than the rest of us. Folks, I'm James Lott Jr. JLJ Media is everywhere. You can follow us all over the place, of course. In between pages on Facebook. Read about our history. Read about this. So there's some fascinating stuff out there with people you don't even know who are affecting what you watched growing up. You'd be surprised. And Norman Brokaw is one of them. We'll talk to you next time.